Incoming transmission from the Imperial Embassy on Sol 3. Priority message from the Hiver ambassador. Decrypting message. Please stand by.
Welcome back to our 5th annual Mayday celebration. This year we have a very special interview arranged. When planning the event, I was contacted by a Hiver who calls himself Tallerand. Tallerand is an ambassador to Terra from the Hive Federation. Welcome, Tallerand. Well, I think we should start out with that name. I understand this is just the name you chose with humans to refer to yourself.
Thank you, Cyborg. My species has no organ that produces modulated sound, and so our language involves movement and gestures. It is a complex language that involves multiple limbs and digits with varying patterns. Your species, along with most others, do not have the mental capability of translating our language with all its nuance. For that reason, we maintain multiple simplified dialects which we use through electronic translators to speak for us. Our names in particular are in the most complex form of our language, and so they do not translate well. My actual name is a reference to a gesture form used in an artistic type of dialogue, something you might call a poem. But that name changes based on my current occupation and intentions. Using that name would require a lengthy explanation at each meeting, and you would still not appreciate the nuance. I selected the name Tallerand from a list of Solomani historical diplomats because I am a diplomat. That way you may look at the name, Tallerand, and remember, diplomat. If I were a philosopher, I would use a name like Plato or Aristotle. We are aware that communicating with us is taxing for your species, and this is one way we try to make our interactions more comfortable for you. I understand that Tallerand is a human family name, and the concept of families fascinates us, as we do not have them. I notice that your name appears on my panel as CyborgPrime. Can you explain the meaning of that name? Were you the first cyborg?
Yes, well, I was originally called Cyborg, but it seems I started a fad and everyone wanted to be known as Cyborg. So I chose CyborgPrime to differentiate myself from the other cyborgs. I'm not clear what the M stands for. Is that a first initial?
The M stands for manipulator in your language. It is an honorific indicating I have conducted a successful interaction as determined by the Manipulations Club of Guaran. By our legal tradition, I am required to preface my name with this honorific to advise everyone of my status.
It sounds like that's considered a positive achievement. You manipulate other species?
The term, manipulation, in your language, has a negative connotation, which is unfortunate, because in mine it is entirely positive. I suggest that a better translation would be, facilitation, rather than, manipulation. We believe that all species have the potential for greatness with the proper leadership and assistance. Many years ago, we decided to take an active role in assisting other Sophont and near-Sophont species on that path.
Some might say you're playing God.
We lack a concept of God. We do not object to you retaining the notion of superior beings. Certainly we have evidence that beings more intelligent and advanced than us lived in this part of the galaxy in the ancient past. Just as your species defined good and evil based on the concept of a superior being, we made similar decisions and definitions. We decided that intelligence is beneficial. Ignorance is unfortunate. Technology is beneficial. Backwardness is unfortunate. Abundant resources are beneficial. Scarcity is unfortunate. We are not playing God, rather we are facilitating beneficial outcomes rather than trusting in entropy to deliver them.
What manipulation did you accomplish?
I have conducted 4 manipulations, though only 3 have been recognized. My first manipulation was many years ago when I facilitated the establishment of a Federation Development Agency embassy on the world of Talmud in Spica sector. This is an independent and underdeveloped system that will benefit greatly from expanded opportunities once the embassy is completed in about 30 years.
Your species is called Hivers, but you don't live in hives. Can you explain?
This is another failure of languages. The first human ambassadors to our world saw the above-ground portions of our nests and thought they resembled the hives of Terran social insects. While we worked on ways to talk with each other, they gave us the name, Hivers, in reference to this, and it stuck. I should point out that Solomani of this era seem to make up their own names for Sophonts quite often. The Fiterla, for example, were named Oslan based on their resemblance to Terran animals even though they have a name that is pronounceable to your species. Similarly, humans referred to the Kukri as centaurs for generations before their own name for their race became known. Much like our personal names, the names we use for our own species are complex and relative based on our interest and position in our society. As an ambassador, I would use one gesture phrase to refer to my species while an engineer would use a different one. We do not expect other species to understand and use this system. When we encountered the Gervin, they created their own name for our race. Regrettably, they combined the words for mouth and excrement. The Za-Tak gave us a similar name, again referring directly to our excretory system. The word Hivers is inaccurate in that it implies a similarity to the Terran social arthropods your people named us for. But we have come to learn that these insects operate with collective intelligence and specialization of labor. To us, this is worthy of respect, and for this reason we do not consider the name Hivers to be pejorative.
Can you describe any unique or interesting aspects of your species' biology or physiology?
I assume you have access to images of us for examination, and you can see from this that the Hiver body model is distinctly different than most of the other species in charted space. Most of you have a torso, limbs, a head containing your brain, and an alimentary canal that carries food and waste through your body. The Hiver body is radial, with 6 limbs. Our forelimb is a sensory cluster for vision and hearing, and our rear limb holds a reproductive pouch. All of our limbs can be used for manipulation. We do not have an alimentary canal and instead ingest and excrete through a single opening on our underside. While most of the other species have genders, we do not. Our reproduction is based on the exchange and combination of gametes, but we all have the same gametes and can reproduce with anyone or by ourselves.
What inspired you to take on the role of ambassador, and how did you prepare for it?
Among my kind, when we find we have an interest or curiosity about something, we dedicate our time to intensive research about the topic. We will join a nest or find a club that specializes in that field of study. The Federation government appointed me to the ambassador to Terra role because I completed advanced studies about your particular species. These studies were self-directed because of my personal interest in Solomani. Among those of my kind who study other sophons, a plurality invest their interest in humanity, as we have learned that the wide variety of your physical and cultural forms precludes any individual cultivating expertise in all of them.
As an ambassador of your species, what do you hope to achieve in your interactions with humans?
I have no specific goals. I think the time I spend on your world will be pleasantly agreeable. I would consider this something akin to what your people refer to as a vacation. Hivers do not take vacations, but if we did, we would come to an exotic world that we are curious about and satisfy that curiosity. Of course, I will be available to address any problems or misunderstandings that may arise between our governments or people. If you need anything like this dealt with, you will be able to find me in one of your museums of anthropology.
How does your species view interstellar travel, and what challenges have you faced in your own travels?
This is an excellent question, and one I am happy to discuss with you. The Hivers have been traveling in interstellar space for much longer than the Solomani, and it is only reasonable that you would want to know what we have deduced about that so far. As you know, there is no single advancement greater to a society than the development of the jump drive. The Hivers discovered it as part of our research into gravitics and high-energy physics. This was during the period of the Roman Republic and Han Dynasty on Terra. We found no threatening races around our homeworld, and instead found a number of nascent sophons that we were able to assist with their early development. This led my species in that direction. We did not meet any serious threats, and no race that could possibly be considered an enemy until 2.5 millennia later, and so we used this time to peacefully expand and encourage the development of sophon life. By contrast, when Solomani finally discovered jump drive after 6,000 years of conflict with your own species, you found another empire of humans at the very first system you visited. Because of your history with violence and limited capacity to accept new paradigms, the human varieties immediately began fighting. It could be argued that this war never ended, just paused several times. The development of jump drive is a great advancement, but the use to which any particular species puts it is a reflection of their own history and tendencies. We were always cooperative and surrounded by friends, so when we got to space we found new friends to cooperate with. You were always competing with each other, so when you got to space and found yourself surrounded by enemies, you fought.
What do you believe are the key differences between your culture and human culture, and how do you navigate these differences?
Again, an excellent question, indicating your intellect is advanced compared to your peers. We have determined there are at least 5,000 distinct human cultures in this sector alone. Extrapolation would tell us there are at least 100,000 human cultures in charted space. Every time you have a group of a few million humans, some portion of them finds a need to separate themselves over usually inconsequential matters. Time passes, and the two groups diverge, and you have thus created a new culture. By contrast, Hivers do not have culture. Humans only have culture because of uncontrolled divergence and balkanization of their societies. Human cultures are defined by differences between each other, and in that way, you could look at Hivers and say we have a culture because we do things differently than you do, but I contend this is a basal difference in our species. I theorize that this tendency toward diversification evident in humanity is a genetic trait common to Terrigen life, because we see this throughout both human and Vargar space. The Villani and Zodani found ways to moderate this trend, but the Solomani never did. The Hiver race has never had that propensity. We have always cooperated and we have always prevented the development of alternative customs. We maintain a standard genotype, something humans would find anathema. We do not subscribe to false beliefs, something humans see as a personal right. We bring other groups together into our federation by mutual agreement, never by force. This is the single key difference between us. All of us in the Federation are working together for a positive future, and different factions of humans are competing with each other, often violently, toward disparate goals. We navigate this difference by considering each human civilization as we would a separate species with its own customs and inclinations. We need to remember that if one group of humans adopts a position, another group may have a diametrically opposed viewpoint.
In your opinion, what is the most pressing issue facing the galaxy today, and how can it be resolved?
I am not an expert in this matter, but I would suggest that the uncontrolled development of machine learning and artificial intelligence could grow to become a threat to biological life. Interstellar governments, even my own, seem to pay little attention to this matter.
How does your species approach technology, and what advancements have you made in this field?
To Hivers, technology is a means to an end. We study things we are curious about, and as we discover our technology is inadequate for that purpose, we undertake research to improve it. It was in this manner, thousands of years ago, that we discovered jump drive. We were curious about the stars around our homeworld and whether they harbored life. Research we had already done in the field of quantum physics implied the existence of jump space, but we lacked the capability to produce enough energy to make jump transition. We had to invent nuclear fusion before we could use the drive we had already designed. This took over 100 years. The Hiver that invented jump drive never lived to see it use. Now, technological improvement is the assigned task of nests that concentrate on particular industrial or scientific research needed to resolve a stated problem. Despite this, many Hivers love to innovate, and there are topical clubs established for this purpose.
So I'm wondering, how is the Hive Federation army organized?
The Federation doesn't have a military force dedicated to fighting on a world's surface. We have some paramilitary formations made up mostly of Ithcler that we deploy in emergencies, but we do not dedicate lives to long-term military campaigns. We have no need to conquer worlds that do not wish to be part of the Federation, so we need no offensive army. In our war, against the Kukri, we found it easier to defend our worlds from space rather than engage their armies on world surfaces. Ultimately, we won the war without fighting a single land battle. I understand that humans feel more secure when they are protected by a large armed fighting force. This comes from your origins as a tribalistic species, when you had to make war with each other in the dirt for resources. In the same way, the Kukri's fascination with ground combat came from their early struggle with a carnivorous species on their homeworld. It's important to realize that the crises and traumas you endured as young species do not need to continue to shape your behavior now and in the future. This is an important step which we were able to help many of our associated races accomplish, and we will be glad to do the same for you.
Have you ever encountered any hostile species in your travels? And how did you handle these situations?
Upon our initial encounters with the Ithcler, they reacted in a hostile manner. We resolved this by standing back and waiting. We found their behavior patterns were predictable. After about 1,000 years of observation, we made contact again, in a different manner, avoiding the violent response we had triggered the first time. We now call the Ithcler our friends and partners. Later we encountered the Kukri. Our previous tactic of waiting and predicting behavior did not work because the Kukri had independently invented jump drive. We came into conflict because our allied species violated their vegetarian beliefs. The war with the Kukri was unavoidable from our side, and forced the Hive Federation to build and deploy a real navy for the first time. We won the war using what we believe was the minimal necessary force and by effective negotiations. It was our hope that we would come to call the Kukri friends and partners as well, but so far they have rejected our attempts to normalize relations.
What is your opinion on the use of force in interstellar conflicts, and under what circumstances do you believe it is justified?
Force should be used only as a matter of defense. Even then, it should be a last resort. Each species comes to sophanthood and then into space under different circumstances, as we already discussed. If a species seems intractably violent, first leave them alone. Talk. If they don't want to talk, walk away. Come back many years later and see how they feel. This worked for us with the Ithcler. It did not work with the Kukri, but it is certainly worth the attempt. As for your own species, our interactions with the Imperium have been peaceful, but we have had occasional conflict with humans from the Solomani Confederation who have come across the border to raid our worlds. This is often because they have mistaken our peaceful nature as indicative of timidity. We do not shy away from defending ourselves from piracy, but we still offer every available alternative resolution to the perpetrators before resorting to violence.
How does your species approach diplomacy, and what are some effective strategies for resolving conflicts?
Our diplomatic strategy is based on mutual understanding and resolution of problems in a manner that brings the best possible net outcome for both parties. Diplomacy is not a zero-sum game, and there is always room for an agreement where both societies benefit. Because of our experience in dealing with a multi-species federation, we are adept at finding solutions where everyone is pleased with the outcome. I think Solomani would benefit from this perspective.
What do you believe is the future of space exploration, and how do you see your species fitting into this future?
This is an interesting question and again demonstrates capacity beyond what we see in the typical Solomani. CyborgPrime, you are an impressive specimen of your species. There is a distinction between exploration and expansion. All of the major races have already found the limits of their expansion. The Vargar and Zodani could expand to Core Ward, but have not. The Solomani and Oslan could expand to Rimward, but have not. The Imperium could press its spinward and trailing borders, but has not. In the same way the Federation could expand to trailing, but has not. Why not? All of us, collectively, have reached the efficient limit to the size of our polities. A message from our capital, Glia, to our Rimward border takes about half a year at the best possible speed. Communications can be accelerated somewhat with a greater expenditure of resources, but past this limit all of our species are experiencing diminishing returns as we expend more than we get from further colonization. The logistics of our supply chains become too long to support settlement without some benefit to it. This limit will be approachable when lack of resources drives us past it. We estimate this will occur for our Federation in about 2,000 years. All of the other polities have this issue. The Imperium has dealt with it best by managing the efficient express boat network and federalizing its autocratic government, and thus has managed to reach approximately twice the Federation's size. Still, its loss of the Julian Protectorate and the Solomani Sphere demonstrates the limitations of this system and shows how political size maximums are realized. Exploring past the diminished returns limit is possible, and we have done so. We have surveyed and catalogued an area 3 sectors past each of the Federation's borders. I believe this is common for all of the major races. The Imperium has also sent scouts past the edges of what we collectively call charted space in all directions. What was discovered there could be summarized by saying there is no benefit to settlement.
How does your species approach governance and decision-making, and what can humans learn from your approach?
It is commendable that you would ask about this. Many species presume their methods are superior and attempt to press others to follow their own system rather than explore what works best for each party. Humanity has come a long way toward the goal of learning tolerance. The Federation recognizes that each species governs itself best. We, the Hivers, do not attempt to impose any kind of structure on the member worlds with the exception that they have to cede military and foreign policy control to the central government. The Federation maintains a monopoly on violence, and uses that to guarantee the safety of interstellar trade and commerce and to protect the member states from external threats. In 3,000 years since, there has not been an incident involving violence or civil war between member states. This is not to say that we have always had perfect relations. A group of Ithklar worlds on our spinward border peacefully seceded, and other worlds and races have been offered membership in the Federation and declined. We recognize their rights to self-determination as we do all Sophont species. Humans follow this same path. The Imperium allows worlds to govern themselves, and the Solomani Confederation operates in much the same way. But they do not recognize this right to self-determination as both polities have had to enforce their central government's supremacy, both internally and externally, with the use of force. They fail to put that limit on their own control, and as a result their authority comes from power, not consent.
How do your species' beliefs and values inform your approach to diplomacy and interstellar relations?
Hivers are genetically cooperative. It is a reflex. It is not subject to evolutionary selection, so it is present in all of us. Since we do not have to discover or develop cooperation, as humans did, we naturally extend cooperation to all Sophonts. So you see, what you call diplomacy is second nature to us, like eating or sleeping. It is therefore also natural that we brought this with us into space and into interstellar society. When we formed the Federation, we did not create an empire, with Hivers at its head. Rather, we nurtured a cooperative organization, with our species as one participant of many.
What do you believe are the most important skills for a human ambassador to possess when interacting with alien species?
patience and tolerance. We need to accept the other race for who they are with equanimity. If we start there, we can find ways to work together and facilitate your continued growth.
How does your species approach the concept of time, and how does this impact your interactions with other species?
Time is the one resource that is utterly spent, and therefore it is important to spend it well. Our individual lives are about the same length as yours, but our federation outlasts each of us. Our nests, our institutions, are durable. This is the long view. Our time is best spent for that which endures.
What do you believe is the most important message you can impart to humans regarding interstellar relations?
Humans have characteristics that have made them, I think inarguably, the dominant species in charted space. It is amazing to us that you have achieved so much with your intellectual capacity. But you still have a number of inadequacies. The first of these is your reliance on culture that leads to a tendency to factionalize, as we already discussed. This also makes you increasingly intolerant about deviations from your own personal culture. As a species, you seem to be growing out of this, but too slowly. The second limitation is your fixation on economics. Humans are obsessed with economics and, at an individual level, with wealth. Everyone needs to be employed and earning money. If they are not, there is unrest, and the government is pressured to make sure everyone can find employment. Humans are considered successful if they are making money, even if they are doing something they do not want to do or a job that is meaningless. What is forgotten in this paradigm is that money is simply a medium to stand in for resources. As we obtain a surplus of resources, the money ceases to have value. Human societies that are approaching a point where they have ample resources often artificially restrict their production to create scarcity to keep their money flowing. In other words, they hinder real development and advancement in order to promote their imaginary means of exchange. Often the people making these decisions are the ones who have substantial monetary assets and wish to protect their value. I realize this might not be clear from your perspective, so I offer an example. When human societies develop fusion for the first time, they have a superabundance of energy. It is no longer necessary to harvest energy from any other source, and there is no longer a reason to charge money for energy transfer. Every human society that confronted these facts initially resolved to restrict fusion in order to preserve the status quo and maintain an energy industry that could continue to sell its product in exchange for money. The Villani did this, the Solomani, the Zodani, the Giani, the Surat, the Dinkia. All of them chose to reduce their energy production rather than face that energy would no longer be worth money. As we expanded, we encountered several human worlds and brought their populations into the Federation as full members. One of the things we were quick to explain to them is that they need to focus on the realities of resource management rather than the simulation of it represented by capital interest. Over thousands of years of interaction, we have been successful in excising these traits from their behavior. There is still freedom of individual action, which both of our species treasure, but without the tendency for division and obsession with economics. I share this information with you and the people of Terra now, knowing that just hearing it will not be enough to effect change. But you asked, and so I told you.
Well, we've come to the end of our interview. Thank you, Tallerand, for joining us and answering my questions.
Thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak with the humans of Terra. I look forward to a long and productive visit here.
And thank you, dear listeners. Until next time, happy traveling.